Have you ever felt spiritually stagnant, as if something was blocking your connection with God? Imagine if there was a powerful key to unlock a new level of intimacy with the Creator, a practice that could revolutionize your spiritual life in just 21 days. Today, I'm going to share with you the transformative secret that has been changing lives for millennia, but which many modern Christians have neglected. Get ready to discover how fasting can unleash a spiritual power you never imagined you possessed. As Isaiah 58:6 reminds us, "Is not this the fast that I have chosen, to loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, to let the oppressed go free, and that you break every yoke?" I vividly remember the day my life changed forever. It was a Sunday morning in Chicago, and I was sitting in the back pew of the church, feeling completely disconnected. The pastor's words seemed hollow, and my once vibrant faith had become a lifeless routine. That's when I heard a testimony that ignited a spark in my dormant heart. A young woman named Sarah stepped up to the pulpit, her eyes shining with a light I hadn't seen in a long time. She began to share how her life had been transformed by a 21-day period of fasting. Sarah spoke about struggles I knew all too well: anxiety, doubts, and a feeling of distance from God. But then she described how fasting led her to such a profound encounter with God that her life was never the same. As Sarah spoke, I felt my heart race. It was as if God was whispering directly to my soul, "This is the way for you, my child." At that moment, I realized I was at a spiritual crossroads. I could continue down the path of empty spiritual routine or embark on a journey of transformation through fasting. Friends, today I want to share with you what I learned on that journey, because I believe many of you are exactly where I was that Sunday. Ready for a change, longing for something more, but not knowing how to reach it. Let me ask you a question. What if fasting is the key to unlocking the spiritual power you've always known existed within you? We live in a world of instant gratification. Here in the United States, we're constantly bombarded with messages telling us to eat more, buy more, consume more. Netflix, fast food, smartphones, everything is designed to give us what we want, when we want it. And unfortunately, that mindset has seeped into our spiritual lives. How many of us treat our faith like a spiritual drive-through? We say quick prayers, read a daily verse on an app, and hope that's enough to sustain our souls. But the truth is, we're starving. Starving for meaning, starving for purpose, starving for a real connection with God. This spiritual hunger manifests in various ways. Maybe you feel constantly anxious, unable to find peace in a chaotic world. Or perhaps you're struggling with doubts, questioning if God really cares about your life. Some of you might be facing addictions that seem impossible to break, while others may feel that your prayers simply aren't being heard. The problem is that we try to fill this spiritual void with things that can never truly satisfy us. We seek comfort in superficial relationships, professional success, or endless entertainment. But at the end of the day, when we're alone with our thoughts, that feeling of emptiness remains. What if I told you that this struggle, this feeling of disconnection, isn't just a personal problem, but a symptom of a broader spiritual epidemic? In our churches, we see people who know the right words to say, who faithfully attend services, but whose hearts are far from God. We see spiritual leaders falling into moral scandals, and Christians who barely distinguish themselves from the secular world around them. The question we must ask ourselves is, how can we break this cycle? How can we move from a superficial faith to a deep, transformative intimacy with God? How can we release the spiritual power that we know exists, but which always seems to be just out of our reach? But what if I told you there's an ancient, tried and true practice that has the power to break the chains of spiritual complacency? A discipline that has been used by giants of faith throughout history to unlock deeper levels of intimacy with God. Fasting isn't just about abstaining from food. It's about creating a space in our lives for God to fill. It's about saying no to the desires of the flesh so that we can say a deeper yes to the Spirit. When we fast, we're essentially turning off the noise of the world and tuning our hearts to heaven's frequency. Imagine being able to hear God's voice with crystal clarity. Imagine feeling His presence so tangible that it seems you could reach out and touch Him. Imagine seeing prayers answered, addictions broken, and relationships restored. All of this is possible when we learn to use the powerful tool of fasting. The fundamental principle we must understand about fasting is that it's not a way to manipulate God or earn His favor. Rather, fasting is an expression of total humility and dependence on God. It's an acknowledgement that man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. Matthew 4:4. When we examine the scriptures, we see that fasting has always been an integral part of the spiritual life of God's people. In the Old Testament, we see powerful examples like Moses, who fasted for 40 days before receiving the 10 Commandments, Exodus 34:28, or Esther, who fasted with all her people before interceding for them, Esther 4:16. In the New Testament, Jesus not only practiced fasting, Matthew 4:2, but also taught about it, assuming it would be a regular practice for his followers. He said, "When you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do," Matthew 6:16, indicating that fasting should be a normal part of Christian life. The Apostle Paul also speaks of fasting as a regular practice in his life and ministry, 2 Corinthians 11:27. In the early church, we see fasting being practiced before important decisions and the sending out of missionaries, Acts 13:2-3. But why is fasting so powerful? Isaiah 58 gives us a profound insight into the kind of fast God desires. It's not just an abstinence from food, but a reorientation of our entire life towards God and His purposes. Verse 6 says, "Is not this the fast that I have chosen? To loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the straps of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke." When we fast in this way, aligning our hearts with God's heart, we see incredible promises. "Then your light shall break forth like the morning, your healing shall spring forth speedily, and your righteousness shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry, and He will say, 'Here I am.'" Isaiah 58:8-9. Fasting, therefore, is not just about denying yourself. It's about making room in our lives for God to work in powerful ways. It's about tuning our hearts to heaven's frequency, allowing the Holy Spirit to work in and through us in ways we never imagined possible. When we practice biblical fasting, we're essentially declaring our total dependence on God. We're saying, "Lord, I need you more than food, comfort, or anything else in this world." It's an act of surrender and trust that positions our heart to receive everything God has for us. One of the most powerful fasting stories in the Bible is that of Daniel. In the book of Daniel, chapter 10, we find an inspiring example of how fasting can open the heavens and bring divine revelation. Daniel was in a position of influence in the Babylonian court, but his heart was heavy with the visions he had received about his people's future. He decides to enter a period of fasting and prayer, seeking understanding and guidance from God. The text tells us, "In those days I, Daniel, was mourning 3 full weeks. I ate no pleasant food, no meat or wine came into my mouth, nor did I anoint myself at all, till 3 whole weeks were fulfilled." Daniel 10:2-3. Notice that this wasn't a total fast from food, but an abstinence from pleasant food and other forms of personal pleasure. Daniel was focused on seeking God with his whole being, removing distractions and comforts that might interfere with his spiritual connection. The result of this fast was nothing short of extraordinary. After 21 days, Daniel had a supernatural encounter that changed not only his life, but the course of history. A heavenly messenger appeared to him, saying, "Do not fear, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart to understand and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come because of your words." Daniel 10:12. This passage reveals several powerful truths about fasting. 1. Fasting positions us to hear from God. Daniel received divine revelation during his fasting period. 2. Fasting has an immediate spiritual impact. God's response was sent on the first day, even though Daniel only experienced it after 21 days. 3. Fasting can trigger spiritual activity. The messenger speaks of a spiritual battle that was fought as a result of Daniel's prayers. 4. Fasting requires perseverance. Daniel continued for 21 days, even without seeing immediate results. 5. Fasting prepares us for deep spiritual experiences. Daniel's encounter with the heavenly messenger was so intense that he was left without strength. Daniel's story shows us that fasting isn't a magic formula, but a spiritual discipline that aligns us with God's purposes and prepares us to receive His revelation and power. Imagine the impact we could have on our families, churches, and nation if we followed Daniel's example. What if, like him, we decided to humble ourselves before God, seeking His face with intensity for 21 days? What revelations might we receive? What spiritual battles might we win? What transformations might we see in our lives and in the lives of those around us? Daniel's fast challenges us to go beyond our spiritual comfort zone and seek God with renewed intensity. It reminds us that there's more to the Christian life than just attending church on Sundays or reading a daily verse. There's a vibrant spiritual realm waiting to be explored, and fasting is one of the keys to unlocking that realm. Now that we understand the power of fasting, how can we apply it practically in our lives? Here are 5 concrete steps to start your transformative fasting journey. 1. Define your purpose. Before you begin, be clear about why you're fasting. Are you seeking direction for an important decision, wanting to break an addiction, or simply desiring a deeper intimacy with God? Write down your purpose and keep it before you during the fast. 2. Choose your type of fast. Not every fast needs to be a total abstinence from food. You can do a Daniel fast, avoiding processed foods and focusing on fruits and vegetables. Or you can fast from social media, television, or anything else that takes up much of your time and attention. 3. Prepare spiritually. In the days leading up to your fast, start preparing your heart. Confess known sins, ask God to reveal areas of your life that need change, and commit to seeking Him with all your heart. 4. Create a replacement plan. The time you would normally spend eating or on activities you're fasting from should be filled with spiritual practices. Plan specific times for prayer, Bible reading, worship, and reflection. 5. Engage in community. If possible, find a prayer partner or small group to fast with you. This provides accountability and encouragement. Remember, Jesus often fasted with His disciples. Think of fasting as a spiritual recalibration. Just as we sometimes need to restart our electronic devices to make them work properly, fasting is like a reboot for our soul. It helps us clear the spiritual cache, removing distractions and reconnecting us to our power source. A helpful metaphor is to think of fasting as tuning a musical instrument. When a violin is out of tune, it produces a dissonant sound. Similarly, when our spiritual life is misaligned, we experience dissonance in our relationships, purpose, and inner peace. Fasting is like tightening the tuning pegs of the violin, carefully adjusting each string until it's perfectly in tune with God's will. As you implement these practices, I ask you, what areas of your life need tuning? Where do you feel spiritual dissonance? Fasting might be the key to restoring the harmony you've been seeking. Let me share with you the story of John, a marketing executive here in New York. John had always been a dedicated Christian, regularly attending church and even leading a small group. However, he felt that his faith had become routine and that his prayer life was stagnant. Inspired by Daniel's story, John decided to embark on a 21-day fast. He chose to abstain from social media, video streaming, and elaborate meals, replacing that time with intensive prayer and word study. In the first few days, John struggled. He found himself instinctively reaching for his phone to check Instagram or turning on the TV after a long day at work. But as he persisted, he began to notice subtle changes. His mind became clearer, and he found himself thinking about Bible verses throughout the day. In the second week, John experienced a breakthrough in his prayer life. During a quiet time, he felt God speaking clearly about a secret addiction to pornography that he had been struggling with for years. With tears in his eyes, John confessed and repented, feeling an enormous weight lifted from his shoulders. As he entered the third week, co-workers began to notice a change in John. He radiated a peace they hadn't seen before. In a particularly tense meeting, John was able to mediate a conflict with a wisdom that surprised everyone, including himself. On the 21st day, John didn't want the fast to end. He had developed an intimacy with God that transformed every aspect of his life. His battle with pornography didn't magically end, but he now had spiritual strategies and a deeper connection with God to face it. Most surprisingly, without actively seeking it, John received a promotion at work. His boss specifically mentioned his recent calm presence and wise leadership as deciding factors. John realized that fasting wasn't just about denying himself, but about creating space for God to work in ways he never imagined possible. He discovered a profound truth. When we empty ourselves, God can fill us with his presence and power in extraordinary ways. Friends, John's story doesn't have to be unique. Each of us has the potential to experience a similar transformation through the power of fasting. Imagine the impact we could have on our families, workplaces, and communities if each of us committed to a period of focused, intentional fasting. I want to challenge you today. Are you ready for a spiritual revolution in your life? Are you willing to sacrifice temporary comfort for lasting intimacy with God? The invitation is extended for you to embark on your own 21-day transformative fasting journey. Don't underestimate the power of a decision. Right now, you're standing at a spiritual crossroads. You can continue on the familiar path of spiritual routine, or you can take a bold step towards a new level of power and intimacy with God. Remember, fasting isn't about perfection. It's about intention. It's not about impressing God or others. It's about positioning your heart to receive everything He has for you. As James 4:8 promises us, draw near to God and He will draw near to you. So, who's with me? Who's ready to release the spiritual power God has placed within you? Going back to the promise I made at the beginning, there is indeed a powerful key to unlock a new level of intimacy with the Creator, a practice that can revolutionize your spiritual life in just 21 days. Fasting is that key. As we've seen in the lives of Daniel, John, and countless other examples throughout history, fasting has the power to open the heavens, break spiritual chains, and bring divine clarity and direction to our lives. The transformation you've been seeking, the spiritual breakthrough you've been longing for, is within your reach. It's not through magic formulas or empty rituals, but through a sincere and focused pursuit of God's heart. Remember Jesus' words in Matthew 6:17-18. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that it will not be obvious to others that you are fasting, but only to your Father, who is unseen, and your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. Your fasting journey could be the catalyst for a spiritual revival, not just in your life, but in your family, church, and community. The power is in your hands. Are you ready to take the first step? Fasting is not just an ancient practice. It's a powerful key to unlock the spiritual potential that God has placed within each of us. It's an invitation to step out of our comfort zone and enter a deeper dimension of faith and intimacy with the Creator. Remember, true fasting isn't just about what we give up, but about what we gain in the process. It's about creating space in our busy lives for God to move in extraordinary ways. It's about tuning our hearts to heaven's frequency and allowing the Holy Spirit to work in and through us in ways we never imagined possible. As we embark on this transformative fasting journey, we're declaring our total dependence on God. We're saying, Lord, I need you more than anything in this world. And when we do this, we position ourselves to experience God's renewing and transforming power in every area of our lives. May we, as the church, rediscover the power of fasting, and in the process, unleash a revival that impacts not just our lives, but the world around us. The invitation has been made. The table is set. It's time to feast in God's presence. Before we close, I want to invite you to join me on this journey of spiritual transformation. If what you've heard today has resonated in your heart, here are 3 actions you can take immediately. First, click the subscribe button below. By subscribing to this channel, you'll have access to more content about fasting, prayer, and spiritual growth. Each video is designed to equip and inspire you in your walk with God. Second, share this video with at least 3 people who you believe could benefit from this message. Imagine the impact we could have if every person who watched this video brought 3 more into this transformation journey. Lastly, leave a comment below sharing your decision to start a fast or a past experience with fasting. Your testimony might be exactly the encouragement someone needs to take the first step. Remember, we're not on this journey alone. As we unite as a community of believers committed to seeking God with all our hearts, we can see revival not just in our individual lives, but in our families, churches, and nation. The power of fasting is within our reach. The question is, are we willing to pay the price for a deeper intimacy with God? Are we ready to see His power manifested in and through us in ways we never imagined? May God bless you as you consider this call to transformative fasting. Until the next video, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, the source of all true power and transformation.